This is the real scene of the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. The glass of the armored car is smashed with a shovel and the precision electronic equipment is kicked away. Soldiers smashed all the instruments and sensitive equipment, swung a chair and smashed the new Apple display, smashed tens of thousands of mechanical keyboards just to physically destroy classified documents and never leave a single machine or device to the Taliban. It's the last madness before U.S. troops leave the country, and a U.S. Army team is tasked with driving out the throngs of Afghan civilians. Armed and armed, they climbed a high wall to intimidate the Afghan civilians. Soldiers threw gas bombs into the crowd, and girls crouched on the ground with their headscarves over their mouths and noses, still unwilling to leave. Seeing that the gas was useless, the American soldiers took out their shotguns and loaded them with rubber bullets and fired them into the crowd. Not enough to kill, but powerful enough to leave one young man with a bullet wound all over his body. The father handed his child over to the American troops in the hope that they would give him a chance to live, but in the end, the child was abandoned at the airport after the American troops withdrew. Desperate Afghan men clinging to a barbed wire fence are pushed away by American troops. A woman screams, "Help me or the Taliban will kill me." More people stepped on others as they approached, tossing children from unknown families through the crowd. Soon more than 5,000 people were gathered under the American wall. People were shouting for help, showing their passports and even proof that they had worked for the U.S. Army. But the U.S. Army chose to ignore them. Soon, some of the crowd began to storm the wall, but they were pushed out on the spot, in the sewers outside the perimeter of the wall. Despite the stench of excrement, there were many people in the water. They walked around with their certificates in their hands and soaked in the stinking water for hours just to get a chance to escape. With the situation out of control, the U.S. military had to open the gates and let a few people in to get their papers checked. But in the end, they were all kicked out just to give the crowd a glimmer of hope that they wouldn't violently storm the fence. In order to maintain order at the airport, the U.S. military and the Taliban have reached a tentative agreement that the Taliban will assist in the evacuation of U.S. troops. They've taken their pickup trucks right out into the streets, and they're looking very nervous with their guns and ammunition. At this point, the Afghan people are looking at the Taliban as if they were animals. They're scared. They're running away from them. They're looking at them funny. As the chaos continues, the Taliban open fire to disperse the crowd, which looks like frightened sheep. There's even an old man with a rocket coming in to maintain the scene in a friendly manner, and people are worried that he's going to go off accidentally. But the Taliban's job is not to drive them away. It's to monitor the people and not allow anyone to leave their country. Soldiers simply raised the butts of their rifles and drove people away, using wooden sticks to deal directly with those who didn't listen. But it didn't stop people from gathering at the airport. Instead, the gunshots caused more chaos and people started to run. Some started to use ropes to get over the fence to try to get into the airport to try to save their lives. As more and more people climbed over the wall, a gap opened up in the airport fence. The U.S. defense line was finally breached by the crowd, and a large number of people poured onto the runway, hoping to board the plane as a sign of their freedom. This is a real scene from the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. A U.S. C-17 transport plane forced a takeoff, causing Afghan civilians to fall from a high altitude. Their American dream falls straight through the air, leaving them in a state of shock. But people rushed to the airport and they began to scramble for new flights. The elevators of the planes were packed, the cabins were full of people, and they were grossly overloaded. Thousands of people still lingered below, trying to find a chance to pull someone off. U.S. troops drove armored vehicles directly and violently away from the crowds of people trying to board the planes, and soon clashes erupted at the airport between disgruntled Taliban and U.S. troops. The crowd crouches on the ground, shivering. Apache helicopter gunships drove directly onto the runway and drove the crowd away, their propellers shaking the crowd. Armored vehicles are also actively cooperating to open the way for C-17s to drive onto the runway. The surrounding area is filled with heavily armed soldiers, but the people are not afraid to continue to approach, still frantically rushing toward the aircraft. They cover their ears and chase after the aircraft that has not yet stopped. A large number of Afghans followed the plane and ran underneath the huge aircraft, densely packed with people waiting for it to stop and trying to board it. The helicopter gunships have no choice but to stay low and get right in front of the crowd, but they can't stop them from getting closer. Gathering more and more people, quite like India, climbed the train momentum. But these transport planes are specifically designed to evacuate American troops. As the C-17s taxied into position, the Marines began to board in an orderly fashion, carrying their luggage on their backs. A barbed wire fence has been erected around the perimeter for fear of an attack, and a team of American troops has been sent out to defend the perimeter wall of the airport to establish a perimeter. A large number of civilians remain outside, holding up certificates of service to the U.S. military in the hope that the U.S. military will do the right thing and take them with them. A compound wall separates U.S. troops from the civilians, eliminating any hope of their escape. U.S. troops mounted the wall and patrolled in alternating shifts. The Taliban have given a clear timetable for the evacuation of all troops by August 31st, 21st, on time.